The phone was 3 feet from his body, close enough to reach. It didn't matter. The cord had already been pulled from the wall. For nearly 90 minutes, no one at 4th Street Church of Christ thought anything was wrong. Matthew Winkler was 31 years old, a pulpit minister known for never missing a service. On a Wednesday evening in March 2006, he didn't show up. By the time church members let themselves into his home, they found him in the bedroom, shot once in the back. His wife and 3 young daughters were gone. So was the family minivan. Nothing in the house was broken or stolen. Nothing pointed to a robbery. For the next day and a half, this wasn't treated as a murder investigation. It was treated as a search for 4 missing people, 3 of them children, somewhere out there with whoever did this. Then police found the van, 600 miles away, on the Alabama coast. What happened in the 10 minutes after that stop would turn the entire case on its head and raise a question that a jury, a small Tennessee town, and thousands of true crime followers still can't fully agree on today. Selmer, Tennessee sits about 80 miles east of Memphis, the kind of small town where everyone notices when something's off. And on the morning of March 22, 2006, small things had already started adding up before anyone realized why. At the local elementary school, 3 sisters didn't show up for class. No call, no note, nothing unusual on its own, but noted. At the church office, Secretary Betty Wilkerson noticed Matthew Winkler hadn't come in to collect his mail. Again, on its own, nothing alarming. Ministers get busy. But by that evening, when Matthew failed to appear for the Wednesday night service he was supposed to lead, those small details stopped feeling separate and started feeling connected. Matthew Winkler didn't miss services. Members of the congregation waited, checked their watches, waited longer. After about an hour, a group of church elders decided to check on him themselves. The Winklers lived in a house owned by the church, just a few miles from the building. The men who went to check had a key, and when no one answered the door, they let themselves in. What they found inside was a scene without an obvious explanation. Nothing was ransacked. No signs of a break-in. No drawers pulled out. Nothing thrown or broken. It looked, in almost every way, like an ordinary house on an ordinary day. Then they reached the bedroom. Matthew Winkler was on the floor, shot in the back. He was 31 years old. His wife, Mary, and their 3 daughters were nowhere in the house. Neither was the family's minivan. At that point, investigators had a dead man and a missing family, and no way yet to know if those 2 facts were connected, or if somewhere out there, a wife and 3 young children were in danger themselves. Police issued an Amber Alert. For the next day and a half, law enforcement across state lines treated this the only way the evidence allowed them to. Not as a murder case with a suspect, but as a race to find a family before whoever did this could hurt them too. To understand why this case shook an entire community, you have to understand who Matthew Winkler was to that community. He was born on November 21, 1974, in Henderson, Tennessee. He spent his childhood moving between Woodbury and Huntington, Tennessee, and Decatur, Alabama, always within the world of the Church of Christ. Preaching wasn't just a career path in his family. It was closer to an inheritance. His father, Dan Winkler, was a minister. His grandfather, Wendell Winkler, had built a national reputation as an evangelist over a career spanning more than 50 years. By the time Matthew stepped into his own pulpit, he was already considered a 4th-generation preacher. He attended Freed-Hardeman University in Henderson, Tennessee, a college closely tied to the Church of Christ. He was tall, athletic, a former high school football player, and by most accounts a genuinely gifted speaker. People who sat in his congregation described him as magnetic behind the pulpit, the kind of preacher whose sermons people actually stayed awake for. It was at Freed-Hardeman that he met Mary Freeland. She was born on December 10, 1973, in Guys, Tennessee, a small community not far from where she'd eventually settle. Like Matthew, she came from a strict, church-centered upbringing. The 2 married in 1996. Matthew was 21. Mary was 22. She left college to help support his education, a decision that fit neatly into a shared worldview where the husband was considered the head of the household. Their first daughter, Patricia, was born in 1997. Their second, Mary Alice, known as Allie, arrived in 1999. Their youngest, Brianna, was born in early 2005. As Matthew's career advanced, from youth minister to lead pulpit minister in Selmer, the Winklers became something like a model family in their world. A respected preacher, a devoted wife, 3 young daughters, a household built entirely around faith and appearances that, from a distance, looked close to ideal. That was the version of the Winklers most people saw. It's also the version this case would spend the next year taking apart, piece by piece, as investigators, attorneys, and eventually a jury tried to figure out what had actually been happening behind that image, long before anyone outside that house knew there was anything to look at. The search that began in Selmer ended 340 miles away, on the Gulf Coast of Alabama. Investigators had been treating this as a race against time, a missing mother and 3 young girls who might be in danger from whoever had killed Matthew Winkler. Then, in Orange Beach, Alabama, a police officer spotted the family's minivan. Because this was still being handled as a possible abduction, officers approached the vehicle the way you'd approach any situation where a kidnapper might be armed and desperate. They ordered the driver out of the van, hands up, walking backward toward them. The driver was Mary Winkler. The 3 girls were in the van with her, unharmed. And by every account from the officers on scene, Mary herself was calm, not panicked, not distressed, not behaving like a woman who'd spent the last day and a half running from whoever murdered her husband. One officer later said it was almost like she'd been expecting them. Then they searched the van. Inside, they found a shotgun. In that single moment, everything about this case changed. A woman who minutes earlier had been treated as a potential victim, someone law enforcement was trying to rescue, was now the center of a homicide investigation. The girls were taken into the custody of Child Services. Mary was handcuffed, read her rights, and taken in for questioning. This is usually the point in a case like this where people expect answers. Instead, what came next only raised more questions about what actually happened in that bedroom, and whether the woman driving that van had planned this from the start, or was somehow just as much a casualty of that marriage as her husband was. A few hours after her arrest, Mary Winkler sat down with a Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agent named Stan Stablers. The interview lasted just over an hour, and it was recorded. According to the agent, Mary didn't come across as someone in shock. She was composed, measured, not the reaction he'd expect from someone who'd just spent a day and a half fleeing the scene of her husband's death. At first, she spoke carefully, almost protectively, about Matthew. Then, gradually, her account shifted into something darker. She described years of criticism, being picked apart over small things, the way she walked, the way she ate. She said it had built up over time until, in her words, something in her finally gave way. She told investigators she remembered getting upset that morning. She remembered a boom, louder than she expected, and remembered him falling from the bed onto the floor. But when it came to the actual moment in between, walking to the closet, retrieving the shotgun, pulling the trigger, her account went blank. She said she simply didn't remember any of it happening. That gap in her memory is where the case gets complicated and where the official record starts to conflict with itself. Because separately, in accounts that surfaced after her arrest, there are claims that Matthew was still alive after being shot, conscious enough to speak, and that some kind of exchange happened between them before she left the room. If that's accurate, it suggests a level of awareness and presence that doesn't sit easily next to her claim of not remembering how the gun even ended up in her hands. While investigators worked to reconcile Mary's account with the physical evidence, the forensic and financial details of this case were building into something far more specific than anyone initially expected. The autopsy was conducted by forensic pathologist Stacy Turner. She testified that the shotgun blast had fractured Matthew's spine and ribs and caused damage across multiple internal organs. In total, she recovered 77 individual pellets from his body. Turner also testified that based on the aspiration of blood found in his airway, Matthew had continued breathing for some period after being shot, and that in her professional opinion, he likely died within minutes rather than instantly. As for distance, Turner placed the shotgun somewhere between 1 and 4 feet from his body at the moment it was fired. That's not a wild guess. It's based on how a shotgun blast behaves physically. Tennessee's state medical examiner, Dr. Bruce Levy, explained this publicly during the investigation. A shotgun doesn't fire a single bullet. It fires a shell packed with hundreds of small metal pellets that spread out as they travel. The tighter the spread on the body, the closer the shot. The wider the spread, the farther away the shooter was standing. To pin down an exact range, investigators would need to fire the same weapon and compare the resulting pellet pattern to the wound itself, a process that takes time, which is part of why the medical investigation stretched on for weeks after the shooting, pending toxicology results as well. Then there was the phone. Investigators noted that the bedroom telephone was found several feet from Matthew's body, unplugged from the wall. To the state, the implication was straightforward. If that phone had been usable, someone in that house could have called for help while Matthew was still alive. Instead, no call was made. But physical evidence wasn't the only thing investigators were building a case around. Prosecutors also traced a financial trail that, they argued, gave Mary a very direct motive. In the months leading up to the shooting, the Winklers' finances had unraveled. It started, according to prosecutors, with a fraudulent check tied to a lottery scam, the kind where a check arrives that looks legitimate but isn't. Instead of throwing it away, Mary deposited it and spent the money before it bounced. To cover that shortfall, she began moving funds between multiple bank accounts, a practice known as check kiting, essentially writing checks against money that wasn't actually there yet. She diverted the family's mail to a post office box and opened accounts out of town, seemingly to keep the paper trail away from Matthew. Prosecutors argued the pressure came to a head in the days right before the shooting. A co-worker at the school where Mary substitute taught recalled seeing her pacing during a phone call, visibly upset. The state's theory was that the bank was closing in, demanding she come in and explain the bounced checks and bring her husband with her. According to prosecutors, that deadline landed on March 22nd, the same day Matthew was killed. Put together, this is the timeline the prosecution built. A woman facing financial exposure that could destroy her husband's standing in their marriage. A confrontation building for days. A morning where, according to her own words, something in her finally broke. None of this proved intent on its own, but it gave the state a motive with dates, transactions, and witnesses attached to it. Something far more concrete than a vague argument about a difficult marriage. And it set up the exact fight that would define the trial to come. Whether this was a woman cornered by her own choices, or a woman who had simply endured more than anyone outside that house ever saw. Taken together, the physical evidence and the financial trail gave the prosecution two separate arguments they could bring into the same courtroom. The autopsy suggested a shooting that happened at close range, not the kind of thing that fits neatly with an accident. The financial records suggested a woman facing exposure, just as her husband's reputation and the family's standing in their church hung in the balance. Neither piece of evidence, on its own, proved intent, but together, they gave prosecutors the outline of a motive and a method, one they'd bring in front of a jury just weeks later, in a trial that would turn out to be far more complicated than either side expected. Neither version has ever been fully proven over the other. What's clear is that these two accounts, hers and the one attributed to that moment by the bed, can't both be completely true. And that contradiction, more than almost anything else recovered in this case, is what the prosecution and the defense would spend the next year pulling in opposite directions, each side insisting their version was the one that actually happened that morning. The trial opened on April 9, 2007, more than a year after Matthew Winkler's death, in a courtroom that would spend the next several weeks trying to reconstruct what actually happened inside that marriage. Mary's defense was led by attorneys Steve Faries and Leslie Baldwin, both of whom had taken the case without charging her a fee. On the other side, the prosecution was handled by District Attorney Michael Donahoe and Assistant District Attorney Walt Freeland. The criminal case was over, but for Mary Winkler, the fight over her daughters was just beginning. Matthew's parents, Dan and Diane Winkler, had been caring for the three girls since Mary's arrest. After the manslaughter verdict, they moved to terminate her parental rights entirely and pursued a wrongful death lawsuit against her. Under Tennessee law, a parent convicted of intentionally killing their child's other parent can lose custody outright. But the manslaughter conviction, rather than a murder conviction, combined with the abuse allegations the jury had at least partially credited, complicated that path considerably. What followed was nearly 2 years of legal back and forth. Mary was granted supervised visitation with her daughters, lost it after an appeal from the grandparents, and then had it reinstated. The dispute eventually reached the Tennessee Supreme Court, which ultimately rejected the grandparents' effort to block her visits altogether. In August 2008, the two sides reached an agreement, and Mary regained custody of her 3 daughters. In the years since, reporting on Mary's life has been limited, largely because she's avoided media attention. In a 2010 interview, she disclosed that she'd been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis after initially mistaking early symptoms, numbness on one side of her body, for something else entirely. The diagnosis reportedly forced her to abandon plans she'd made to return to school and train as a nurse. She's also reported to have taken a public stance against a 2011 made-for-television movie based on her case, reportedly objecting to how her story was being dramatized for entertainment. That detail is less firmly documented than the custody outcome or her medical diagnosis, but it's been repeated across enough reporting on her life after the trial to be worth noting here. Beyond that, most accounts describe a woman who's largely stayed out of the public eye, raising her daughters and, according to more recent reporting, involved in community and charitable work. Whatever the full truth of her life today looks like, one thing is consistent across almost every account. She chose to stay out of the spotlight that this case built around her. The state's case rested largely on the financial trail and the physical evidence already established during the investigation. Prosecutors walked the jury through the check-kiting scheme, the unplugged phone, and the forensic testimony on the shotgun. They called firearms experts to confirm the weapon required a deliberate trigger pull to fire. The prosecution rested its case on April 16th. Before resting, prosecutors called the Winklers' oldest daughter, Patricia, then 9 years old, to the stand. Cameras in the courtroom were turned off for her testimony. She described being startled awake that morning and going into her parents' room, where she found her father on the floor. When asked whether her father had been a good father and whether he'd ever been cruel to her mother, her answers supported the image of a stable household rather than an abusive one. It was, by any measure, difficult testimony for a 9-year-old to give and difficult for a courtroom to sit through. The defense then built its case around a very different picture of that marriage. They called witnesses who described a different side of Matthew behind closed doors, including accounts of controlling behavior and isolation from Mary's family, along with testimony referencing a visible injury one witness said they'd seen. None of it amounted to documented medical proof of abuse, something the prosecution repeatedly pointed out. The centerpiece of the defense's psychological argument came from forensic psychologist Dr. Lynn Zager, who testified that Mary had a history of unresolved trauma dating back to adolescence, and that she was prone to dissociative episodes under extreme stress. In Zager's professional opinion, Mary may not have been capable, in that moment, of forming clear intent. Then Mary herself took the stand. She described years of abuse within the marriage and testified about elements of the relationship she found degrading, at one point presenting a wig and a pair of high-heeled shoes that she said her husband had pressured her to wear. The reaction in the courtroom, by multiple accounts, was audible. On the central question of intent, her testimony didn't change from what she'd told investigators the year before. She said she didn't remember retrieving the gun or firing it, only a sound, and then running. The defense rested 2 days after Patricia's testimony had already shaped the emotional tone of the trial. In closing arguments, prosecutors argued this was a woman who killed to protect her secrets, not a woman defending herself. The defense conceded very little ground, arguing instead that the state hadn't proven intent to kill at all. The jury deliberated for about 8 hours. On April 19, 2007, they returned a verdict of voluntary manslaughter, a significant step down from the first-degree murder charge Mary had faced. Her sentencing came weeks later. The judge handed down 210 days, with credit for the roughly 143 days she'd already spent in jail awaiting trial. Of the time remaining, the court allowed the majority of it, 60 days, to be served in a mental health facility rather than in prison. The verdict didn't sit easily with everyone who reached it. Jury foreman Bill Berry spoke publicly afterward, and his comments complicated the outcome rather than settling it. He said he personally doubted some of the physical abuse claims, and wasn't convinced by the sexual abuse allegations either, though he acknowledged there may have been some degree of mental abuse in the marriage. He also said he didn't believe justice had fully been served, and pointed to the makeup of the jury itself as part of why the verdict landed where it did. It's a rare thing, a juror going on record with doubts about the very verdict he helped deliver. And it's one of the clearest signs that even the 12 people closest to this case, the ones who heard every piece of evidence firsthand, walked away from that courtroom without full agreement on what actually happened that morning in Selmer. More than 15 years later, this case still splits people the same way it split that jury. Was Mary Winkler a woman who killed to protect a financial secret, or a woman who broke after years of abuse no one outside that house ever saw? The evidence supports pieces of both arguments, and neither side has ever fully closed the gap. What's certain is that a man is dead, 3 daughters grew up without their father, and the only person who could settle this with certainty has never told it the same way twice. What's your verdict? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more cases like this one, subscribe. We're just getting started.